Good evening, everyone. We are starting our meeting, our town council retreat of May 20th, 6:05. And in attendance, we have all 6 of the town councilors. Okay, so I wanted to informally get together, although it is being recorded, and talk about priorities and kind of best practices and what we hope to accomplish this year. It's something we've done most years that I've been on the council. We didn't do it last year, but I have some handouts of previous years that I found that I'm happy to pass back. We've actually accomplished a lot of the priorities that we set, and my hope is that we can go around, kind of say what you hope to work on, maybe something you want to research more, something we want to investigate more. And then periodically, maybe quarterly, maybe after, 6 months, we can kind of go back to the list and I'll type it up and share it so that we all have something to kind of go back, kind of keep us on track of what we hope to do pending no emergencies like COVID. Does that work for everyone? Yeah, okay. And then after we can go around and kind of just say things. And then the other thing that I wanted to maybe start, at least get the idea out there, but get on the calendar, is we also used to do town council office hours, which were fairly successful, where whoever could show up, showed up, and members of the public could come and talk to us about whatever. When we started, I think we did it at Brothers once, then we used to do it at the farmers market. I'm going to propose that Inspire Cafe, you can use their space after 4 p.m. And so I'm going to suggest that maybe we find a date, and if folks can come, great. But I'm a big believer in meeting people where they're at. And I think it's good to hear back from people about their concerns and issues. We've had some really good dialogues in the past with people. So maybe at the end, we'll try to schedule one of those in the next couple of months. Okay, and everyone's eating as we're talking. Jonathan, I'm going to let you take one more bite, and then I'm going to have you start.
Yep. Let me swallow what I had.
Is one of the handouts that goals and priorities chart?
This is my list. This was my own.
So I printed out these. I'll pass them around. I didn't make copies for everyone. These are from years past. So if you want to, these are from 2002 and 2003. Right.
I did a quick town website search and was unsuccessful.
Yeah. So these were, they're little hidden. So I can pass these around and you can quickly look at them. I should have emailed them, but
Say, I thought they
Found it there.
Showing his guest. It'll take a couple minutes.
So I have a couple of things that I want to highlight, and they're actually in some cases kind of continuations of things that have been on at least the list 2 years ago, just because we continue working on these. I'd say the first thing is finalizing the redevelopment plans for Butler Ave and the Herd School. I think, we've been obviously for good reasons with Butler Ave because of the environmental remediation that's taken longer than we expected. But I would like this to finally be the year that we have, kind of a plan for both of those that we're able to execute either through a decision by the town council or if necessary, by town meeting. Butler Ave and the Herd School.
Yeah. We
say your line. No relation.
Oh,
I thought you were going to make a comment about not wanting.
No. Oh, no. I don't, I'd sooner burn it down, but yeah, don't want.
That's where the other Butler family lives.
I was going to say things burning down created the problem we have with Butler Ave in the first place. So we probably don't want to go there. Allegedly.
Yeah.
Second item, this has been a big priority of mine, continuing expansion and improvement of the sidewalk network. We've made some really good progress. I love what's happening on Prospect Street right now. I think there are still some areas that need work. We had talked in the bike ped plan, for example, about standardizing how crosswalks are striped. I don't think we've really executed that. And I think there's sort of a larger visibility issue there that we need to think through. I also think there are some significant areas where we really do still have pretty significant sidewalk gaps on major streets. Forest Street is the one that I'm most concerned about. Like that is a horrendous area to walk, and there's no protection for any pedestrian on what is a pretty busy street with really bad sight lines.
Heard that this spring from several people I talked to.
Yeah. No, I feel like when I've knocked doors there, it's like taking your life in your hands as you're going from house to house. Third priority is Envision Wakefield. So this is one, we are supposedly on the 2026 and 2028 tip lists. And so I think there are two pieces of this. One is making sure that we don't fall off of those lists because of a lack of work or meeting milestones on our cases. I also am concerned, and I think this is where there's probably some effort to work with our legislative delegation around the funding availability for those projects in light of all the cuts that the federal government is making. We spent a lot of time on that. We actually spent a lot of money on the design so far, and so I want to make sure that we're able to move those ahead. Fourth, I promise this isn't a list of 10, but it is a list of 6. Fourth, obviously, Wakefield High School project, making sure we progress towards completion there, continue to remain on time and on budget. I actually feel very confident on that one. Fifth, not surprisingly, successfully hiring a new town administrator and onboarding that person, as well as some other town leaders. So, we have the vacancy with the planning position. We will have a vacancy with a deputy town administrator. Obviously, a new TA will be part of this, but some critical leadership roles that we need to be thinking about. And then finally, another item on the list is evaluating our options for the DPW facility on North Ave. So this is one where there was a feasibility study done, Steve, 5 years ago.
Maybe 7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It came up with like a massively expensive plan to kind of rebuild the facility, which I don't think is in the cards, but we do need to do something there. And so that's an area where I hope we can partner with permanent building and the DPW and the Public Works Advisory Board to hopefully come up with a more reasonable and achievable plan to address some pretty significant issues there.
Relocating the whole facility.
Are we talking about the one near the middle school or the
Yep.
one down across from the park?
The one near the middle school. So it is work for you guys who haven't been on the council as long. It is worth, if you have a chance, asking Joe Conway to give you a walk through there. Like there's some, it's in pretty rough shape.
I know there's existing underground treatment system for that Kytron building that's still on the state DEP list of petroleum sites.
Yeah, but even setting that apart, just things like, again, structural issues in the garage, area parts of the facility. I mean, the building itself where kind of the offices are there are pretty wretched. So those are my 6 for the year.
Thank you. Steve, I'm just gonna keep a little list of things. Sherry, if there's things that you could add to Govinda, so maybe that feasibility report, since people more than 7 years ago haven't seen it, or if we can just add it to our folder of information. And then I don't think anything else has there's nothing else that we would have information about. Envision Wakefield is on the website. Okay, thank you. John, do you want to go next?
Follow up, this is my first one, so.
Yeah.
John, I mentioned Kytron, and this is probably not the right atmosphere right now with what's happening in Washington, but tying Kytron into that facility and not there might not be a bad idea, in the sense that in Worcester, we built a brand new $65 million maintenance facility and took another 70 million to clean up a gasification plant where we built it. And the Worcester Telegram and Gazette at the time came out saying, the only way we would have cleaned that is with public money. And that money came from the EPA. So if we're thinking down the road, you know, I'd like to have a lot of cards in the game in looking at possible options, but looking for possible grants and efforts. I'm guessing Kitron is there now because they can't sell that building. It's a liability to them, and they're sitting there and sitting on top of a hazardous waste dump. That possibly that might be a course of action that we look at. I'm kind of concerned, and Jonathan, you had brought up the buildings. Just I was asking Steve earlier before the meeting started. I think we should look to sell the school. That just doesn't make sense that we're maintaining a building like that. Other than the fact that trying to help and assist the Friends of the Library trustees to find a location for storage of books. That's the only reason we're keeping it. I don't think that's a good reason. Also thinking down the line, right? I'm concerned about governor just put freeze on hiring, and that to me is a red flag that people are concerned about the economy and what's happening in Washington right now. We ought to be concerned. We have no idea where it's going to go. So when we're talking about goals, Jonathan, and hiring people, we got to keep that in mind. We have a commitment now to add a police officer, one a year for the next 4 years. At least we made the last council made that commitment. You know, what's going to happen when the belts get tightened? And the legislature just talked about where they're going to use the millions tax, and it doesn't sound like it's coming back to cities and towns. At least that's my interpretation of what I heard. And I think originally that's what they talked about. Transit. I know it was transit because I was kind of excited about that. Transit in the cities and towns, and now all of a sudden they've got a whole new agenda. So how we approach our legislators like that, I think is something that we ought to set as a goal. Because we're competing against all of the special interest groups in Wakefield and the surrounding communities, because they go into the legislature and they're asking for various grants and various ways of funding and what have you. And of course, the legislature's got the benefit of going out to these special interest groups and cutting ribbons and getting credit for getting money, where the cities and towns have been level funded for some time now. And so those are my concerns.
Thank you. Steve, we did discuss the Hurd School in depth, right? You had done some, I'm thinking 7 years ago, 8 years ago, you had done a listening tour with.
Yeah, we had done a number of neighborhood meetings there at the school. At that time, I would say the consensus of the people that came to the meetings, which was mainly in the neighborhood, was to redevelop the school for housing within the current footprint.
I don't know if that was it, but that's okay. Well, that is not what I remember.
Okay. We disagree with that, but that's exactly what the consensus was, because I was there at every meeting. But in any event, that was my understanding of the consensus. There was a lot of different things brought up there, from leveling it and having 3 lots to someone suggested putting the DPW garage there.
I don't think that.
And he was a neighbor, and then he came at the end, he said, "I can't believe I said that, strike that." I said, "Yeah, I will." I said, "I couldn't believe you said it either." But I do think, while we're on the subject of the Hurd and/or Butler Ave, if the council is looking to, and I think I would suggest that we do, look to selling both of those properties, and since I won't be here when that happens, that I think that what should be done is a couple of things. I think each parcel should be kind of pre-permitted. So I think the council should kind of get some, different renditions, the Affordable Housing Trust has talked about, particularly the Hurd School. And they've talked about actually having someone come in and give them a kind of a schematic on what would work there with, in an affordability component. And actually permit both projects and sell them permitted, because then the council and the town will control what's there. Both will have to go to town meeting, so they'll both need town meeting votes. And my suggestion would be, after the note is paid off on Butler Ave, that whatever funds there are remaining, and depending on the level of affordability and what wants to be done, there might not be, a hell of a lot of money left over. I think my suggestion would be to put that money into our debt service fund to help with the debt and not to use it for other items. That's purely my suggestion. Remember it, don't remember it. That would be my feeling on both of those projects. Hurd School, we do not need for swing space. For the high school, we did use it for the public safety building. Because for me, and at the end, I'd like to weigh in if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
My big concern would be to set us on a good financial track for the next decade. Like we just enjoyed, so, and I have some thoughts on how to get there, but on those two items, that's where I am. Mr. Butler and I disagree.
Do you,
On the Hurd.
do you recall?
Oh, no, I don't think it was ever like discussed, as there was never any huge sentiment favoring development of the land as a sort of multifamily development. That is what Steve always wanted it to be, but that is not what the townsfolk who spoke up then particularly wanted. And there's some of its neighbors and some of it isn't, and I'm a quasi neighbor. I'm a half mile away. I don't see it. And Steve's been looking to frankly sell this lot for the past 10 years, and was willing to give it away. That you were willing to sell it initially for $1 million. And I think, if we're talking about our priorities, I think one of the things that we really need to do here is you have to preserve and protect the assets we have as a town, and not just go after the short money. God, it's like the SAFER grant all over again. Why are we going to sell this thing and maybe realize $2 million, maybe, for, and give up, because you're never buying that piece. You're never buying land back. That's the thing we never do here. We never repurchase. We don't invest in our land. You're selling it off piece by piece. Eventually, you're not gonna be left with any pieces. You're gonna be doing a sale lease back on this building when you get into tough times. We're not in tough times now, folks. We don't need to be raising capital for the Hurd School. We should actually try and if you want to make this town, and again, this is what I'm talking about, making the town into something that is economically more vibrant, that has some draw to it other than as people's houses. Like, if we want to live as a bedroom community forever, that's fine. That's what we've decided. That's by and large what the past, not 20, 40 years has decided. We've decided that we don't we charge commercial property owners an awful lot. We charge a lot for that. We've really tended to restrict ourselves to offering deals to residential homeowners. Now, residential homeowners now complain about the tax rates being high, but that's because we've essentially squandered any opportunity to have support there. And again, we just, we did even more of it at the head of the lake. We we took that out. So one of the things that I want, so there's two, my goals is to find that we have to find a new administrator. And we have to figure out what, we are doing the process of figuring out what that administrator's goals should be. But we also need, we need to replace either the town planner or the economic development, however we want to describe that role going forward. I think we've got, some of it is we're going to have to hire an administrator, and then they're going to have to figure out, does this structure work for them? Does what we have work for them? I've talked a fair bit about fire in the past. Like, there are some big things that we need to figure out overall around our town and around governance and around everything else. And I think, and I lauded Steve, but like, we would also say, I don't know why we have an elected treasurer. I don't know why we have an elected tax collector. Other than it's in the bylaws, it seems like a fairly stupid bylaw rule then. But like, it seems like it's a job. It's not a, like, if we're gonna elect a treasurer and a tax collector, then why don't we just all go ahead and elect a mayor? So things that I want to get done is, yes, we have to get the housing production plan done. And I think that is almost, I like to set the bar low for myself. So like, that's something that should be done hopefully by, I don't think Steve will see it, but he'll be back from Italy before
So close.
it's done. He's gonna be close.
I'm hoping
should
that
get credit.
from June 9th, they're in front of the town council.
But Doug, we have invested in land. We bought Fellsmere Ave. We
Arundel Ave.
Wendell Ave, head of the lake. We've gone out and purchased land to
Talk to me,
recoup
when
it.
did you
So,
do that?
so the issue,
Ave, 2008, 2000, I'm sorry, 2001, 2000.
We bought Butler Ave because we had to.
Right.
But, and I'm just saying, like, you don't ever get the chances to do these things again. So like, if we keep, but you've sold off, our sale to purchase ratio is probably over the last 30 years, 15-1. Maybe not 15, maybe 7-1.
what's that mean? I have
You've
no
sold
idea.
7
More than you-
You've sold a whole lot more than you've bought. You've sold off a lot of the town's assets.
One thing I do want to clarify on sort of when I talk about the herd school, figuring out the disposition as a goal, like I don't see that as a financial, like I'm not looking to like just pick up some cash from that. Like part of what I'd like to see with that, and maybe this is useful to clarify, with both the herd school and Butler Ave is some sort of kind of directive development of housing that addresses some of the needs that we have. So like, when, one of the residents, when 7 years ago, when we were doing the listening tours for the herd school was like, let's just subdivide it into 3 and build 3 houses. Like that would be a colossal failure in my perspective. Like what I'd like to see is something there that represents, some element of affordability, some element of support for vulnerable communities in the town, support for senior housing, something that creates
Right, and
an opportunity for,
pump the brakes on that, you're about to get 500 new units.
but not 500 units that address the needs of some of the vulnerable populations that we're talking about.
And throw in one thing, I agree with what Doug is saying about holding on to properties and getting the most long-term value for them. And I would tend to agree that selling it off to a private developer in some arrangement is probably not a good idea. And I think what Jonathan just said, I would also emphasize that I've been thinking a lot about the universal housing and the housing production plan and talking to a lot of people out campaigning with this idea of transitional housing for senior citizens and the accessory dwelling unit. So I think like up there, I could envision a multi-unit attractive development that was, targeted for senior citizens, particularly anybody who's just a senior citizen or anybody with a disability. And today I had a conversation with an architect that specializes in universal design housing. And that's going to be one of my priorities. But I think what both of you are talking about have linkages to both that. You want to preserve the property. I don't, like Doug saying, I don't think there's a hurry to sell that property. But when we do put in a plan to redevelop it, I like some of the criteria that you're discussing about affordability, a really attractive senior housing, and something that's an aesthetic upgrade for the neighborhood. Something other than just a condominium complex, something a little bit more innovative.
Are we getting a whole boatload of affordable housing on the Hahn Street now? Like, aren't we getting a lot of that? And then how much of the head of the lake is affordable?
I believe 73 units.
Get, like, you know, and that's the thing is, we keep looking, and this is my thing, like, you know, everybody, we're talking about like, oh, I want more affordable housing. Yeah. Do you? Do you really? Do we really want much more affordable housing? I don't know. I'm not convinced. I just, in general, I think the market sets a certain amount for the housing. I think if you get a dramatic, again, I just think we have to look for development here, like economic development in this town outside of housing. Like, gosh, it just feels like if that's all we can do, then, you know, that's a shame.
So let's finish doing, can we finish doing priorities and then come back to this? Cause I think we can talk more about it, but I just want to get everyone.
I
to
think
say
my,
their-
one of my priorities is like this fixation that we have as it appears a council and as it appears a town of, you know, I think trying to develop our way out of a problem, we're not gonna, doesn't matter what we do. You're not gonna, I mean, unless you, I don't know what you would put in there, but you're not changing that dynamic. And frankly, I am not super pro building out a lot of senior housing. I think the other thing is we've got a lot of new things housing wise on the docket that are coming live right now. We have no idea what the ADU piece is going to do. Let's not, you know, let's just stay there. Like, you know, don't do something, just stand there. Just sometimes let
Yeah.
things come to you.
I'd like to,
Go
I
ahead.
know what you want to lead us, and I agree. But let me say this. I don't know if you read the last couple of weeks, there was a issue up at the elderly housing up okay. There is no longer elderly housing. Okay, the state has ruled that we let, it's almost like Section 8, and I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying the fact that we're mixing everybody in now. By we have the building there that we're maintaining, and that's what bothers me. I mean, why would we maintain a building? Who maintains a building that they don't need and have no foreseen use for? It's very, very close to a bus route, still there.
It's on a bus route. Yeah.
I believe that bus route going down, where
Yeah.
your parents live, right? So that's just around the corner. And, you know, I think it would be a great place for housing, you know, and if it could be affordable housing, that would be a great thing. So I'm talking about the whole picture here, the fact that we're maintaining it. Why would we maintain it? For the Friends of the Library? I mean, that's the issue here. And the fact that when we talk about elderly housing, I don't think we can talk about elderly housing anymore. We have to talk about the restrictions that the state and the federal government have put on us. Just want to make that.
Sure, and just let me make the point that, you know, when we brought up this, when the herd was brought up many years ago, by the way, Butler Ave, do whatever, like, you know, it's a paved over thing of like, you know, whatever. I think that, yes, we should develop that and we've got to develop it because otherwise it's just sort of capped. And we had to throw an unconscionable amount of money at a problem that wasn't our own doing. The amount of money we're spending on keeping up the herd is not dramatic. And let's think about it. When we initially looked into selling the herd, we'd gotten maybe maybe $1.5 million for it. Now we'll probably get a lot more if we went, you know, full-blown developer route. But I don't think that's necessarily so what. Like if you had sold your house 40 years ago, you'd have gotten 80,000 for it, but now you'll get 800,000. Like those are like, you know, there are benefits to holding on to things that you don't, you know, that you don't need to burn through all your stuff. Just because you want to, and by the way, let's not burn through stuff to hire a couple more people. That's the other thing, is maintaining a sense of, you know, a sense of fiscal discipline around the expansion of our employee base at the town.
And when we've sold elementary schools in the past, has that come back as a decision that was full of regret? Because there's been probably 4 or 5 elementary schools that have gone into private hands over the years.
When they sold the Montrose School, the neighborhood had some input into it. And we knew what they were gonna do over there. But we didn't fight it from the standpoint that it was to, basically make the infrastructure stronger by making the Dalby School stronger and cover a larger area. So, and we have a nice little community across the street, so that was not an issue. But the fact is, that's where I recall serving when things were tough in the '70s and even the early '80s. We were looking for nickels and dimes. We were laying people off, and so we have to be thinking down that road. And I want to remind people, because no one of our former councilors who just left would remind us of this, that once we meet the decade, what our 10% factor is going to go right down the tube based on the amount of development we have. So reaching our 10% goal under the goal of 10% affordable housing may not be there. I mean, we have a lot of housing going on. We're adding a lot to it, but they're not counting the other developments that are going on. So basically, we may be looking at another, future 40B developments because we're behind the 8 ball. So
Yeah, I don't.
Okay, let's go around priorities.
Get to-
Steve, on the list of documents, last year, you had given us a great document of all town-owned property. If you could put that in the documents as well, I think that's just helpful for the new people to see that. Because something in this discussion we'll discuss later was not 5 commons. Nobody brought up 5 commons, which we spent a lot of time talking about before too, which is the building right next door. Stacy.
Okay, so some of mine is in the nature of like, being new person. I also had the herd. I very much prefer to hold on to it on the thinking that it's a fantastic location, land is the thing that they're not making any more of, like all the things that we talked about a little bit here. Would love to help the library figure out where they're going to do their stuff. If a decision is made about the herd, obviously you guys are well aware, they're very concerned about what's their future and how does that look? And that's not the driving decision-making factor, but they're concerned and would be nice to find them a home if there's one around town.
Can I just say one?
Yes.
Yeah.
We've had that conversation with the Freds for like the last.
Oh,
6
I'm
years.
sure. I know.
So, and just to clarify, it's not the library, it's
It's the Friends of
the
the Library, right.
nonprofit.
Yes,
That
yes.
actually has a pretty substantial bank account that we found out last year or 2 years ago. So they've actually got money. And we have explored options with them. We have a lot of storage facilities and other nonprofits don't get to use town property for free. So it is a conversation we've been having for a long time, but I just wanted, it is not the library,
Yes,
it is a
correct. Yes,
nonprofit.
That's right. Yep. Thank you. Yes, I misspoke. Butler Ave, I agree. Would love to just get to, I'm not close to the ins and the outs, but I don't understand why it's been so delayed, because usually when it was presented at town meeting a handful of years ago, it seemed like this is a fairly limited in scope cleanup,
We found more.
Okay, but so that's.
Yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
that complicated though. So, can we just finish that up and
It.
put, and put some.
Town meeting did give more money to finish it up, so.
Yes, no, that's right. No, that's right. Yes. Okay, so that was good. We've talked about, I know this body has talked about the Molease building 10,000 times. I was meeting with Economic Development Council and they said, oh, they were in front of town council and there was some deadline coming up. They were supposed to have an action item. I don't know that. I have to go back and look at the old meeting, but if something is supposed to happen with that building.
There is going to be a pre-demolition, I don't know what demolition means, this week with all the town departments. So that's a step
Pre-demolition meeting.
because we do that anyway. A part of their decision on Molease building was about that we were going to demolish the building. And I don't know if that just means inside or what that means. They were going to meet with police, fire, engineering.
And does that meeting happen before they pull a demo permit?
They pulled the demo.
Oh, they have pulled
They
it.
pull the demo permit. But before they do anything, there has to be that kind of coordination.
Got
meeting. So that's happening this week.
the the meeting we had with them, they're trying to do everything on the cheap. It just is not a positive thing, but I don't think we have any control over it.
Oh, no, boy.
Yeah.
So, they basically had there's at least 3 different buildings put together there, in different kinds of construction. And so they were looking at modifications based on the type of construction of the part of the building that we're in. And, so I'd like to know what the demolition is, because in the rear of that is just a concrete block building that was added on
Yep.
years afterwards. The front is a wooden structure, and it's got 2 levels. So it's actually 3 structures. So they were talking about working over the winter, doing certain things. And quite frankly, without going in, it didn't make sense to me what they were talking about. So it'll be interesting what they're going to say in this demolition report, because I asked the question outright. Why aren't you just tearing the whole thing down?
Who's the owner of the building now?
It's, it's the Sagronis family from Malton.
Yeah,
They've owned it forever.
This is
they owned it when it was still the operating restaurant too.
Yes, they own it. Yeah.
This is speculation. I think it's smart speculation. When they get rid of Belize, they raised the rent. And I used to go to Belize all the time, so I knew the 2 sisters. I visited their place at Amesbury.
Amesbury, yeah.
On Amesbury. They jacked the rent up because they wanted some vital repairs made to the building. So what happened in this situation is he took that property and he mortgaged it to the hilt. He had cash flow. I mean, he's not a person who worries about cash flow. So basically he's using that asset to raise money. And they get 15 years to write it off, and it's almost 15 years to the date when they close the lease. And now all of a sudden there's no more write-off anymore, and he's turning around. Now that's speculation. Don't read it as fact, but I think that's what's happened there.
Well, it sure is an eyesore. I am feeling like budget-wise, there's a buzzsaw that we're all gonna, try to desperately avoid walking into. I think, I just think it's gonna be really, between listening to FinCom talk at town meeting, what you hear in the newspaper, what you are hearing from Maura Healy. I just think there's a lot of indicators that tell us that, these grants and things that are very important to a lot of the operating budgets in town just may not be available. So I think we're going to have our eyes wide open to the strong possibility that there's some really tough decisions that may need to be made in the future. And that may mean letting go of, some pieces of candy that we'd love to have, kind of thing. I just have this sinking, having worked, for a company deep up to my elbows during the 2008, 2009 years, I well remember how tough that can be. And you just have to be really objective and honest and transparent and, approach it with goodwill and, just a spirit of getting it done. So that may be me being, it's my uncharacteristic pessimistic side may be coming in. But anyway, I just mentioned that. Something I heard when I was campaigning was, you touched on this a little bit, Doug, that we are a little bit as a town sometimes can be a bit siloed, and like bigger questions like, why is, your example, why is this position elected and this one isn't? So as I learn more and get into this more, am curious about communication and interdepartmental cooperation, I guess. I don't understand that concern enough at this point in where I am right now, but it was something that I heard from several different credible people that was intriguing and interesting to me. The other question I wanted to throw out to this group is the fact that we are having a deputy. I know Kevin is our deputy town administrator. Is that now a baked in position forevermore, or is that transitional, or is that something that this body looks at, or, for my own learning? Because I'm not, as I sit and without knowing more, I'm not sure it's a necessary job once the full transition occurs after Kevin retires, but I don't know if that's. a
It
decision that's
is
been
a
made.
budget decision by the town council.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, I think every
Yeah.
position, no position is baked in permanently
Okay.
except to
Yeah.
town administrator or other positions in charter. I mean, everything else is ultimately discretionary.
Okay. And then just community events, part of the most important reason that I love Wakefield and have stayed here for so long is I love the festival on the lake. I just love when people come out of their house and do something together. And I know Economic Development Council has quite a lot of money that they're sitting on to do those kind of things. So I'm their liaison. We'll hope to work with them for some of that. The fact that I don't know if anybody made it down to the food truck festival on Sunday, there were like several hundred people down there. And that was interesting to me. And it was, was a fairly small in scope event, and there were a lot of people out. So that tells me that there's a hunger for getting together, and especially if, times are a little bit tough and tricky, it may be more important than ever to try to get our community, just together.
Yeah.
That's all I had.
That's plenty.
That's
Thank
enough.
you. And John,
So I guess I'm thinking about, sort of 3 or 4 things. Two of them, one of them is certainly the leadership positions in town with the town administrator. But with all the development issues, I think second after the town administrator would be hiring a really competent town planner and seeing somebody that's, in just my few brief conversation with Samantha, seemed like she really knew the zoning, housing dynamics really well. So I think getting somebody else hired for the town that has that same skill set, that understands this dynamic between escalating land prices and what resources we have locally, what's private. So I think getting a really competent town planner would be a priority of mine. I'd also like to see somebody that possibly has a transportation planning element to the description for the job. Since we're like from the master plan committee, I hear a lot of hear everybody complaining about traffic. I hear everybody complaining about getting around town in different capacities. There's a senior citizen component to that. There's a young kid component to that. So I think the town planner role should be looked at really carefully, what the job description is. On the housing side, I've been talking to a couple of the planning people in town as I was campaigning, and I think keying off what Stacy was saying about putting an interdepartment group together, I think it would be great once the housing production plan is finalized, is talking about a strategy for implementing some of the elements of that. And one of my interests is looking at possibly linking the new accessory dwelling unit regulation with putting together like a public procurement or some technical resources for how you actually use the ADU bylaw to build better designed universal access housing. So for example, that could involve the planning board, that could involve like training for the building inspector, who may not have that type of, knowledge about what universal design is. I just interviewed an architect today he's working for a private firm, and they're getting these questions coming now from other cities and towns about how they adapt the accessory dwelling unit for well-designed senior housing. So I think there's a coordination role and a technical resource role we can play on the housing side. That would be one possibility. Another one is, of course, funding. And I know Steve talked with me about the housing trust. But I think we'd look at some type of additional funding mechanism for housing kinds of issues in town that we could use as seed money to bring in developers who are actually going to build this newer type of housing, some of this more innovative stuff that we want to get away from the single family only housing and fill a real need for both, not just the senior population, but I think there's also a real hunger in this town for younger people. I mean, I know two younger people that moved to Wakefield and they couldn't afford a place here and they moved, one moved to Somerville, one moved to Chelsea. You know, so I think younger people do want to come here. So I think we've got to think strategically about the HPP and what we can do interdepartmentally to put some better resources in place for encouraging the kind of ADU construction you know, we want to see. So just like one fact I learned today is there's an I believe Natick put one together that they're doing the very same thing. They're putting together like a strategic plan for how they're going to implement the ADU regulation in their town. So that would be one of my priorities. And of course, my other one is alternative transportation. So between the master plan and the bike and ped plan, I'd like to hopefully find some resources to take that to the next level of doing some better design and public process for doing with the master plan, which is like a bike and pedestrian network linking the sidewalk improvements that Jonathan talked about a minute ago. So I think having a really good urban design consultant take those pieces of the plan and work together with the new town planner would be, you know, definitely one of my priorities.
I have a question. What's the interface between Envision Wakefield and the master plan? How do
I
how do
think,
they talk to each other?
well, I think they talk to themselves in a variety of ways. One is, well, Envision is, you know, the core downtown. And my understanding there is it's going to be a major reconfiguration of the downtown streets. So if we were going to connect other parts of town into Envision, we'd have to know what those other connected routes would be, you know. Like some towns are going, I was just up in Georgetown this morning and they have like a new walkability signage in town telling you how to get from one neighborhood to another. So there's an actual physical infrastructure piece of it. There's also like developing network of projects that you would use to, you know, connect the lake to Envision, because it stops at I believe at Church Street. So there's the lake component. There's also Greenwood down in the neighborhood where I live, which is how to connect, make better connections between the Greenwood, all the outlying neighborhoods in downtown. And the master plan gets into that in that transportation chapter. And so there's some really good urban
When
design.
you say the master plan, you mean like the old like,
The one that has yet to be approved.
okay,
Yeah,
the draft.
the draft. Yeah, I'm still talking about the draft. So I think those would be like three of my priorities. And I think the other part of it is, you know, one of the other elements I've been talking about within the groups that I move in is the safe routes to schools component. I know that like Bill is redoing that intersection in front of the high school. But there's some, you know, useful planning resources we could use for making improvements around some of the other schools.
It's got the master plan draft to get
Aaron.
to Aaron. Okay.
She sent out an email about 6 to 8 weeks ago about and I talked with her, had coffee with her. She's saying that they got a whole new senior planner assigned to it from MAPC who's been rewriting it and editing it into an actual readable document.
God bless him.
That's
That's not a small task.
I've heard his name before, so I know he's one of their senior people. Yeah, but I think there's an element in the master plan that touches on all these issues we've been talking about today.
We make sure this stuff is available to us, because I don't want to get surprised with this down the road. John, I think this is somewhere you and I probably gonna disagree forever on, but my concern is that this is all being designed around individuals who want to avail themselves of riding bikes in any way they want to. And past, we've discussed this in past meetings, and you know, I brought up the fact that North Ave Main Street is going to be contingent on what happens on North Ave, as well as the street I live on, Lowell Street. Okay. And this just comes from common sense. It doesn't come from traffic studies. It comes to the fact that when you stop traffic in the afternoon coming home, and you stop traffic somewhere between Main Street and North Ave, traffic's gonna go down. It's gonna go down North Ave. And they're trying to avoid that traffic jam on 128. Now,
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
if there's some incident that happens on 128 North, 95 North.
Yeah.
Between North Ave and Main Street, all of the traffic's gonna be directed down North Ave.
Right.
Okay, now, when you do traffic calming there, that's gonna cause the traffic to go Route 128 over the hill coming down, what's the name of the street? Coming down to oh,
Lowell,
pardon?
Lowell? Lowell?
Wall Street?
Yeah, well, Prospect Street.
Prospect.
Prospect Street. So anything that do happen when you do traffic calming and into and around the lake, it affects traffic coming down Lowell Street, somewhere along the line. Now, if you do the same thing on Main Street, 'cause North Ave does not make sense unless you do Main Street. The whole idea is to have,
We can disagree on that, but go ahead.
okay, well, we probably will, and we would respectively. So basically, the plan is, north and south, Main Street will be south. And basically, now all of a sudden, we're gonna turn, we're gonna turn, Lowell Street into 128 A. I mean, the traffic's gotta go somewhere. And anybody who commutes on a daily basis, which I did for 14 years, coming home from Worcester, knows what's happened. As soon as you know a traffic jam, you look at Waze. Recently, there was an accident, and one of our citizens posted it, and I saw it on Facebook. So I looked up Waze, and I could tell where the traffic was, and I could tell where the traffic was going. So you can't do it it's common sense. Traffic is going to go somewhere. And so when you do traffic calming on a certain street, it's going to affect the other streets around it. And so
I think you could get reasonable people to disagree with that assertion, but let me just plant the seed to this, is that we have traffic congestion and it's being driven by a couple of key factors. It's being driven by building more housing that is car dependent. It's being driven by the fact that, some people are moving to different places, and, you can look at the national numbers that commuting to different employment opportunities has just expanded. So I don't think you can blame traffic calming measures as the decisive factor, because, for example, if you had a bike network in town, that's one less car that's joining the traffic. And in some cases, and I'll just say it plain, is like the North Ave redesign wasn't taking any capacity away from cars. No cars would have been prevented or burdened by driving down North Ave with the bike lane in place. And I've talked to 3 road engineers, and they've all given me chapter and verse on this. So I think when we're talking about traffic congestion, you have to take the next step, which is alternative modes of transportation. And frankly, like when I was holding signs out of the last thing, I don't want to, get off on a tangent, but I was actually amazed standing on the corner down here, just how many people on bikes at 10, 11, and 12 I saw, because I'd actually never stood on the corner there for 2 solid hours before. So I was pleasantly surprised by that activity. And I think that, I know there's been a lot of, heated discussions about it, but when I go to talk to local business people, I think that I see the boba tea place down here. The guy, I was down there buying my daughter a boba tea, and there were 8 kids on bikes, 8 young kids. And I thought, that's really awesome. Here's a local business getting patronized by kids, paying customers, and they're all getting down there on their bikes. And that's going to work in some places. It's not going to work in others. But I think the whole safety, traffic congestion, alternative transportation piece is in the master plan. And there's a lot of valuable discussion there. And I think, frankly, that's one of my priorities for the council. I think that it's a huge community improvement. If you go to any of the communities, I'm amazed. I'll ride my bike from here to Lexington Center, and I see whole families out, and you can tell it's a really family affair. Like they've actually gotten down there and they're shopping and they're spending money at restaurants. And they're all walking, got big, long, heavy duty baby carriages, I call them all-terrain baby carriages, and they're on bikes too. And now that some of the younger kids are on these like small electric scooters and adults, so I think that there's a huge opportunity there for us to actually relieve congestion.
Respectfully disagree.
So two things to add to the list. Steve, can you send out the draft master plan? And then if we could get an update from Erin of just how the final version is coming along. We haven't talked about it in a while. That would be really helpful.
Was that the plan that had the wrong town name in it?
Yeah,
Oh, I remember hearing that. Okay.
it was
Yeah.
pretty bad. One thing we may need to think about too with that, so we had the master plan advisory committee that, once we got this kind of lousy draft, hasn't really met. And, some of those people I think some people have moved out of town since that, I don't know if we need to think about like reconstituting some like public process around kind of vetting that document or, public process for comment, just given that it's been so long since, I think it's been 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while.
So I think it's probably a future agenda topic for us to think about, as part of the vetting process, like what do we do now? How do we kind of pick up the thread?
But the plan that had the wrong town's names in it was actually the one that came from the
Concom.
yeah,
I didn't.
It was the draft.
Master plan.
It was the draft. Oh, it was pretty bad.
Really?
yeah.
I don't think it ever got released because it was sent to the town council. And it was, and this was before you guys were elected because Ann Danahy was.
But the one with the wrong names, wrong towns recently was the.
But the master plan draft was not a need.
No. This was sent to a state agency on our behalf. And I voted with the folks who wanted to continue this to look at it. And I have no problems with looking at this. I have no problems with studying it. I think it's a shame that we have a FOSS report filed with the state, filed by an MRP's employee, and that we haven't done anything about. So sometimes we do things shorthanded. I'm not a fan of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. The surveys they take are not conclusive. I don't know anybody who ever heard from them. So basically what I perceive is happening, because I don't know the facts around this, is they attract people to respond to their surveys based on those people's interests. So those people come out and say, yeah, we think it's the greatest thing in the world. Let's do this, okay? But the other people who are outside, because everybody's busy today, not all the people are involved in listening to what's going on in the town. They have no idea what's going on, but yet we think, oh, we did a survey, everybody likes it. I'm very concerned about all of these surveys that I've seen. We had the other one that came in from the Conservation Commission. A report on their, what was that on, Steve? I forget what was the subject matter on the conservation.
Space and development, open space and recreation.
Yeah, open space and recreation. They only mentioned dogs in that plan twice. How is that possible? You survey the people in Wakefield and only twice did they ever mention dogs. So some of this stuff is bad information. It's advocated by the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. They go out and say, okay, we'll help you put this plan together. So they hire these employees and they come up with these subpar reports, and then we base what we're going to do on that. That's a major concern of mine.
Well, if I can just chip in one thing, because I hire consultants for my job, the last 3 jobs I've had with the state, and there are good consultants and there are not so good consultants.
Agreed.
And there's also clients that try to get a superior product without paying for it. I think, like, I don't know what we paid for, like the first draft of some of the other plans, but you have to look at a really good consultant charges you a good amount of money for writing reports, because that's actually a time consuming. I'm hiring a consultant right now, and writing the report is $75,000. the year-long study, but like synthesizing all that data, vetting it.
I respect what you're saying, my friend.
it's a
In
lot-
fact,
it's a lot.
you mentioned the town planner who we're losing. That woman won my respect in two different situations. And she knew what she was talking about. She prepared herself well. And the town has paid the price for not having a town planner. So I think that's something we agree with, John. I think we should have a strong town planner and they're doing all the research for us and not count on these subpar consultants who exist, coming from a state agency that is promoting.
Has that job been posted? Does anybody know?
Not yet,
Not yet.
but it will be.
I think the other thing is us to like make sure we are thinking about all of these things, you know, and again, I tease the people of Wakefield sometimes about being flat earthers to a degree in terms of not, you know, not wanting change or abiding change. But I also don't think, you know, I think one of my commitments has been let's not pretend we're Arlington. Let's not pretend we're Lexington. We're not that urban. We don't have that sort of money. It's fine to be aspirational around these things, but also let's remember who the people are who we have here and what our people want to do and what we're frankly willing to pay for and what we're willing to build as a town. Like, yes, by the way, you know what? Lexington would have never had Molise for 15 years. Lexington would have never had B of A for however long it's been. We have absurdly respected commercial property owners on Main Street's property rights. And frankly, we absurdly respected their property. Like we have let them get away with bloody murder throughout. We like, you know, we did a little sign thing maybe 10, 12 years ago that is sort of half-assedly, not enforced, but like great. So like, oh, well, we don't do interior illumination. So now we can hang up posters as a sign. I mean, whatever. We were, you know, we had a notion that we were fancifying the town and all we look like is like, you know, a Dollar Tree version of fancy. So I think, you know, one of my big concerns, and it's a concern around the Envision Wakefield. And again, this gets to what you're going to do with downtown. I mean, people already can't park there. And I understand like, oh, maybe we don't want to respect the car that much. Sure. But everybody here drives. Have probably a car per person in Wakefield, somewhere around that. Would you guess?
Maybe.
We're not moving off that. And it's, you know, it's great that we would want to try, but I think what you don't want to do is you don't want to set up a downtown that is already struggling to like find tenants to choke it off anymore. Or maybe we're not. Maybe you're saying that like this is going to provide growth for it. You know, the question is like, it's interesting. Like, there's a bunch of acts that have been done. So like, by the way, I was totally for leaving the bike lane open on North Ave. We are going to have a great change in our demographics. If, by the way, the other thing is I don't even know, what are the places going for at the head of the lake? $4,000?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. Are they gonna get filled? Like, that's the interesting question, is like, you know,
Well, the other ones seem to be getting filled.
are the one at over at your end of the street at Hop,
That's
that's the one that's full?
Yep. Yeah, that's full. Grayson Lofts is full.
Say the apartments are only going $4,000 a piece. A month.
Month.
2-bedroom, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, was that a 3? Yeah, 3 bedrooms for $4,000. Wow.
So then should we think about economic levers? You like a vacant property tax? You know, like if the landlords, if you've been talking to them for X number of years and nothing's happening and you know, or have good intel to know that they have money, they're just for their own personal reasons, not dealing with the town to get these properties in shape that would help the town. Should we be working with bylaw committee or with whoever we need to be working with to figure out some economic levers that we can push them on? Because there's things, there are things that we can do, but it's it's aggressive, right?
Right, and I think we haven't really employed sticks or carrots, really. We tried the sticks with the healthcare folks, right? But that wasn't enough.
A number of years ago, there was a bylaw presented to town meeting, and it was somewhat of a nominal penalty for if it was vacant for a period of time and they didn't meet certain things.
I think it was like they only got penalized too if like they wouldn't like
Ex-
agree to putting up like public art or something.
Something like
window.
that.
And it was really like
And it failed the town meeting.
Yeah.
Oh, it failed. Okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it wouldn't.
Right, that's
out, but
right.
I'm just
No,
saying-
that's right.
I do think one of the things that we have now that we didn't back then is the Economic Development Council. And I think thinking about, I actually think we've done a lot on the carrot approach. I mean, when you think about what we're doing with the sign and the facade program and all the things that Julianne presented to us last night, that probably is a good group to think about, like, are there sticks that we can employ as well? And I think one of the reasons, thinking back to 2019, why that bylaw failed was it kind of came out of the bylaw review committee. It wasn't really vetted by anyone in town, and like just the arguments for it, the sort of the pitch for why this mattered was never really made. And I think the vetting with sort of the right, the business groups in town, the chamber, Main Street's Wakefield at the time, I don't think that ever happened. I think because we have this Economic Development Council now, like we have an opportunity to kind of take a step back and say, like, what is it that we would want to do? And how do we get alignment with the right stakeholders so that if we do come to something that has some consensus, that it actually has a chance to passing in town meeting?
We never, at least I was not involved in the discussion, but our zoning bylaws failed. Nobody would have ever believed 30 years ago that you would replace industrial property, business property with houses. Okay, Foundry Street's gone. American Mutual, Bill Lee, who this town hall is named after, was famous for the fact that he brought American Mutual into the town and created a lot of jobs, and a lot of people going to work there. $4,000 a month. Not many people in Wakefield could afford to live there. I mean, so our zoning bylaws failed because nobody ever anticipated replacing this kind of property with housing. And so I don't know what the answer is. That we didn't cause this. I'm not sure we.
I mean, I think a lot of it is macroeconomic, right? Like, I mean,
We're kind of surprised by it.
yeah.
So is the key issue with downtown with what Doug was talking about, because I've heard this from a whole variety of people, is that you've got a lot of stagnant property owners that are just hanging on to property and looking out for their own short-term economic interests, and there's no incentive for them to like renovate the lease building in under 15 years? Are they just kind of not a great owner?
Well, Malise building, he was taking that tax write-off for the 15 years. So that the tax write-off was greater than what he could have ever rented it for. And that's why he evicted Malise, by virtue of raising rents.
And they've got dozens of properties that they own in different places, and
You have
they're able to, they're finagling.
you have to be a mega property owner, with not worried about cash flow to be able to do that.
Hundreds.
And big cities get around this by having a building commission, where they can go in and they take property by eminent domain and they work around it. So you always have that threat. But small town, it's tough to do that.
But there's something to do, right?
Well, this last council and the council before that did a great job, in my opinion, of calling them in and asking them to do something. But the response was kind of ridiculous. I mean, they're taking 3 buildings there, police, and they're gonna rebuild them. I'd love to be involved in that, Steve, and find out exactly what they're doing for demolition, because it's 3 different buildings.
What you don't want is just a demolished thing that looks worse than what's there now, right? Like the way
Yeah.
you're talking, it's like a concrete thing out back and
You put a facade on an ugly property. I will give credit that Kitchen Place did a nice job on the awning building down there. They just redid that. That's an improvement.
I think supported by our sign and facade program too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Pardon?
Supported by our sign and facade program.
Yeah, yeah.
and you said all that money has to be spent by 12/31 of next year, right?
12/31/26, yes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
18 months from now.
Right.
That's soon.
But there's a lot of commitments right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Has Wakefield ever considered, like one of these marketplace models where the town actually buys a property and hires a developer to like, the one I happen to know just because I went to UMass Amherst was this place in Northampton called Thorne's Marketplace. It was like a 4-story old factory building, and they broke it up into very small allotments of mom and pop kind of shops. And it's been an anchor place in the downtown area. Other stores have come and gone, but the marketplace has always been there. I'm thinking like, could we find the property development enough seed money to come up with like an anchor property in town so that we could lease it out to very small mom and pop operations, and they would not be subject to, the whims of the private marketplace quite as much for monthly rent.
I don't know where you find the money today. I mean, that's a big issue right
That
now.
might be an interesting thing to think about for the herd school. I mean, it's not downtown, but
And you
Residential
you'd
neighbor.
have to get town meeting to approve the allocation of the funds, would you not, or would you not?
If we were to borrow, yes. If we got a grant, no. But are we buying property? So then probably yes, you need town meeting to buy it.
As you mentioned earlier in the meeting, this list of town-owned property, are there any
Yeah.
town-owned properties in the core downtown area?
No.
That we divided up? No,
Yeah. 5 Common, which is what we use anyway.
right?
Yeah. Civic Center, I wouldn't change that.
About the Bank of America, so
So-
it's being done.
I don't know.
No,
I don't know in the Bank of America.
No, I just mean like, like you think of places that are. You think of where we should, potentially build a parking lot. It's the Bank of America building where we already have a lot. That we could put up, that we could do something to not revitalize downtown, but at least make downtown readily useful. It's still, you try and pick up something from Socorro and you're like, and I should have biked. It's,
I think we had a garage plan paid for by somebody else.
look, let's not,
Sticks under my craw, it really does.
we do have to get over,
Yeah.
it was a different Wakefield back then. It was, more.
I think of like flagship projects. I just like, I've talked to a couple of people that, and I'm amazed, like this place in Northampton, like other buildings have gone out of business and other stores have gone out of business. But there's smaller operations, circulating in and out of there for the last 35 years. And it generates a lot of activity because it's just got a great variety of like small mom and pop stores of restaurants and an ice cream place and a toy store for kids, and used to have a shoe store. The shoe store went out of business, but it's always, no matter what time of the year I go there, it's always there's a great amount of activity, and it kind of anchors this one corner in the center of the town.
there was a place in Lowell that was similar to that. I mean, it's now closed, but Mill Number 5 up in Lowell kind of had like a similar thing. I mean, it was privately owned, which is part of the reason it's closed, but had kind of almost like an indoor bazaar of like smaller shop spaces
Yeah,
where
like these like shopping cart, like the
Yeah.
Frank's hot dog guy would get an indoor cart and set up shop inside the building.
Have access to a restroom.
Years ago, people all went uptown to go to the bank. They don't do that anymore. So what drives the people to come downtown now? Restaurants probably, and we have sufficient restaurants there.
We don't, we maybe don't. We don't have, like, the things we don't have is we don't have entertainment down there. So like, that's probably what. Look, the other thing about Wakefield is we're not, you know, we don't have any major thoroughfare. And there's no Route 28 that Stoneham and Reading have. There's no Lynn Fells that Melrose has. We don't have a big road that is providing, we don't have a big artery, so there's always gonna be traffic problems here. And we have to have people have to have a reason to go downtown, and yeah, some of it is like, yes, should some of our places have live music and things like that and be more welcoming and accommodating for, you know, either evening entertainment or anything else? Yeah, that would be good. I mean, I think everybody was excited when the bank was potentially becoming a brew pub. I think they're probably less excited by what it's potentially going to become.
Which bank is this?
The big,
Santander.
What is it gonna become?
Trust company. It's weird because they publicized once that they were gonna do a development there, then there's put a for rent sign up.
I think they're having trouble leasing it to that sort of.
they're having trouble finding, like, it's gonna be a tough place to lease or frankly to develop. It's like, big old granite building that's not. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a property developer. I don't know what could be done there, but it's a shame because it's one of the, it's one of the central properties of our downtown. And you think about the other thing that, like, if we were talking about what would you borrow? I wouldn't borrow 2 million. I wouldn't borrow like this. If I was going to borrow and try and inject economic development I'd buy up the wherever the Sheraton is, or the Lord Wakefield. You'd buy that whole thing. And
Lord Wakefield or the Sheraton.
the no, not the Sheraton, the Lord Wakefield.
Do you know
and
how much,
that whole section would be, I would guess probably 35 or 40 million.
yeah, he rejected an offer for 90 million,
90?
like
Yeah.
7 years ago.
Still owned by a lawyer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the story.
I went to not my class, my classroom is just involved with the class prior, the 68th reunion last year. So some friends of mine came up, they invited me, even though I didn't graduate that class. And I met them at the hotel. And they came down and said, John, you don't know how bad these rooms are. Stained carpets. I mean, horrendous. So it's just a shame that they can't make that work.
Right. And the other thing that, let's not kid ourselves, I've only got 2 years left. So, the ideal thing would be if we ever had a plan to actually do a cleanup of the lake. Like not one of these piddly things where we're gonna, but actually clean it up and actually get rid of it and whatever.
So you stole my priority
Oh, I'm sorry.
because I didn't get to go yet. So I'm gonna go and then we'll discuss.
You should take on chairman's prerogative and just go on first.
I was listening to everyone. I'm gonna take everyone's best idea and then add a couple of my own. No, just kidding. But I inherited that from the person whose seat I took, Pat Glenn, who was like, the lake used to be swimmable. Let's make it swimmable once again. I think to clean it up, we have fits and bursts where we do it. I just think that would be amazing to start thinking about that. For the amount of time and effort we put in Envision in downtown, I'd love to do some serious consideration about the Greenwood area. So, there's especially cleaning up the commuter rail. And I go on walks and then I send Steve a bunch of emails. And the other day, because I had a flat tire, I had to walk back to my house. The fence is disgusting at Greenwood. Like, I think we could do some beautification on our side. And also because people aren't commuting, all those parking spots are empty. And I think we should have a conversation about that. It's not a moneymaker anymore. And what are we doing? Like, we could do something there. There was, I think there's close to 80 spots, 90 spots, and there was 10 cars on a Thursday. People just aren't commuting in every day, right? So all of that space, let's think about that. Putting sidewalks on both sides. People spoke about Forest Street, but I think on the other side of the street, there's no sidewalk there. So we have the space to kind of make Greenwood. The intersection of Oak and Main is kind of disgusting. And I feel like we've tried to clean it up before, and I'd love to beautify that section a little bit. I think it is another part of town that people enter from. And so I would love to just kind of think about and give those businesses some support and love down there as well, especially as we have some new businesses down there. So Lake Greenwood, number one, I think on all of our minds is just the transition and onboarding of a new town administrator. I'm going to say this as our retreat, right? I think post July until we, with an interim and then onboarding someone else, I think there's just going to be a lot more of our attention might not go to these bigger projects as we try to onboard somebody and get them, learning all these issues. They're not going to have 17 years plus of institutional memory. And so I think for all of us to be aware of that, right? Like I do hear that the budget next year is going to look really different. So, I think this part of today, Steve, is also to make sure that you're on schedule of kind of having a transition memo and an exit memo, and everything that's in your head is like on paper somewhere. And as much as we can finish and not have the next person inherit. So as we talk about, posting for the senior planner and maybe even hiring them or finishing up the master plan or wherever that is, or the housing production plan, all of the things that have kind of been in limbo, it would be great to just kind of wrap those up. And then the last one that's always been there, and I feel like we've made little steps, is as we talk, we talk a lot about people alternative to cars. And I think we've always talked about walkability and sidewalks and making sure the roads are better. And something we talked a lot about was micro transit in Wakefield, and with the new high school coming, is there opportunities to have shuttles or vans instead of always having, people driving, and especially kids driving, but people who graduated from the high school a while ago said there used to be a late bus. Do we think about something like that? I'm really excited. We did it, we at town meeting got another van for the senior center. And when we were up there, when John and Stacy and I were up there, I heard about people who don't drive and live in Wakefield and call the senior center to go to their PT in town and go to, their doctor's appointments. And that's the only interaction they had with the senior center. They had no idea. They just said, oh, we call and we go to our appointments because we don't drive. But they're like, oh, we're going to sign up for a class. Like, we're going to come here. And I was like, oh, that's great. And so I'm glad that we did 2 of that. I think for the seniors, it makes sense. I'd love to kind of think about some other modes. And with all of that is like more sidewalks. I think Safe Streets had kind of come up with a plan near the schools, and school/commuter rail to kind of have better sidewalks. So I'd love to look at that. So
Is that the new development at the head of the lake? I feel like way back, they were talking about a shuttle to run downtown. Is that something that people have kept up?
Erin is working with them on that, and hopefully include all of those apartment type buildings in that area.
Yeah. That'd be nice.
I've actually got a lot of interest in the master plan discussion for transit and a micro transit route.
yeah. I'm always surprised because you don't see it, but if you're looking for it, you see it. And sometimes when I leave my house at 7 a.m. on a Saturday, I am shocked at the number of people waiting at bus stops. Like, people use that 136, 137.
Not the 136.
It doesn't exist. 137, yes. As I used it the other day. But yeah, it's shocking. And it's shocking to see early in the morning. If early in the morning, folks that get off at Oak Grove and then hop on a bike and bike to restaurants in Wakefield. And I'll see them then at the chefs and cooks at the restaurants in Wakefield. And so they spend all their days here. And so what are we, let's think about that population as well. So I'm just shocked. You'll go by a bus stop and there's 7 people waiting for the bus. So
Maids the other day getting on the bus with vacuum cleaners. I thought,
Mm.
wow, now that's hustle.
yeah, yeah. I think we have to be cognizant of who, lives and works in our town. So those are my 3, but the lake is something I'd love to have more conversation about that.
Do we have a sense, Steve? I mean, I know a lot of what we've talked about with the lake is sort of inflow prevention, which was kind of like the impetus behind like the parking lot, renovation at Vets Field. Obviously, a lot of the remediation money coming from Cabot Forbes for Main Street. Where are we on some of those efforts? Because like thinking long term, like I think the intent was always like reduce the inflow and then you can address the water quality in Lake Q. But we're kind of at a place where we still have a ton of stuff flowing
Right,
in.
well, none of the work by Cabot Forbes has really been done yet.
So that's what I mean. Do we know when, how?
I don't know when that's gonna happen.
They're gonna have a talk about that at the Friends of Lake Corner.
Yeah, tomorrow's Thursday night, so, yeah.
Did the DEP ever create a waterways plan or a water impact study for Lake Quantapowhat? Because usually when they do one of these watershed studies, they do calculations about how much water is flowing in and how much water is circulating through the water body.
There's been a number of studies going back to the 70s with different plans and what have you. Basically, we're dumping fertilizer from the lake, houses around the lake, into the lake. And so the most recent actions that they put in the the name of it's not coming to me, but when they built by the Hot John House there,
They put in that retention, rain retention, bioretention, yeah.
done some filtration, but it's not gonna solve the whole problem. You got all those beautiful houses up along the lake, and they're all using fertilizer, and it's all draining into the lake.
But that was
That's part of the plan.
remediation money from Cabot and Forbes. The
But-
idea was that
Yeah.
we should be developing, I don't know if we have, but we should be developing an inflow plan for that entire stretch of Main Street. Like that was what they were supposed to be funding for us. So maybe this is just an agenda item for an upcoming council meeting, but I feel like there's stuff that we've been talking about for a while that should be underway. Even the parking lot at Vets Field, I mean, we approved that like 3 years ago, 2 years ago. But like those are things that we designed partly because they'd have a meaningful impact on inflow into the lake. What's that?
Do 3 years ago?
The renovation of the parking lot on Vets Field. So that's one of the biggest areas of inflow into the lake because it actually like the parking lot kind of slopes downwards towards the lake.
That in the bathroom, that was gonna be.
Yeah. So as part of that project, they were going to regrade that parking lot and create a bio retention area in the middle so that basically we'd be able to reduce or eliminate one of the biggest sources of inflow into the lake. Main Street was the other one, obviously, kind of the head of the lake where the development is going. The stuff that we approved with ARPA funds in terms of the end of, is it Beacon or Lakeside? I always miss up those 2 streets. Lakeside, I think, where we had like the Mississippi
Yeah.
Delta flowing into the lake from that street.
Yes, Lakeside.
Yeah, Lakeside.
Have we ever tried to regulate the use of nitrogen-based fertilizers that are flowing into the watershed?
We don't use it, and a lot of people don't. It's hard to find now. That has actually gotten better, but we can't check everybody what they're doing in their yards.
No, I was just saying there's like a watershed association up in the summer place that's very active. They've been building up a voluntary program for years about no phosphorus or nitrogen-based fertilizers within 500 feet of the lake shore. And they regulate boats that come in and out of the lake for what do you call it? Invasive species that could pollute the lake as well.
I gotta say, I don't, anybody who's seen my lawn knows that I'm not doing anything there. But also like
None.
none. I guess the birds that fly over, but more importantly, like, one of these things, it seems to me like I think that might be a bit disingenuous thinking that like it's the runoff from the houses that are on the other side, that there's two sets of drains, sewer drains that presumably, unless those sewer drains feed into the lake, and if they do, well, then there's your problem.
I think they do.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Like, so sewerage is, that's not included in our water and sewer bill. So like the drains,
Drainage, no.
street drainage goes straight into like, well,
Yeah.
then you're not getting, like, I mean, then why are we even talking about swimming in the lake again?
Well,
Because
but again, we have this money from Cabin Forbes, the intent of which is to create a system where that's not going directly into the lake. Similar.
give us $1.5 billion, like, that's not gonna do it.
It did put a dent in it, as I recall. It's on my list to talk to Bill about. Also remember that swimming in the lake, while that's great, and I've had this
Oh, yeah.
talking with Pat Glynn for many years, it is a funding issue going forward. Are you you're gonna have to have lifeguards? What are we gonna do?
Yeah,
There's a big issue about that.
it's a goal.
It's a goal.
As I said to you before, it's a goal.
So you're saying, Jonathan, is like, I know Bill's, I talked with him about that. He gave me the engineering drawings for the stormwater. Stormwater improvements on the lake. So that would seem to be the first thing, is elimination of that stormwater.
Filtering of it, yeah.
But someone told me the bed there's arsenic in the bed of the lake
Yes.
too. So now you're talking about like dredging, which is like unbelievably expensive, right? So.
We've looked at fountains, we've looked at what was that other thing?
Solar bees.
Solar bees, that we looked at
Yep.
solar bees. We've looked at all of those things.
Yeah.
It is a big issue. There's a company called Moliere that does a kind of a water agitation system. Saw a presentation by them, but that'd be $1 million.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big nut.
Oh, yeah.
And it may not work. You may
There's a
still
ton
have.
of invasive species
Yeah.
down there. I took a walk with somebody from Concon
Yeah.
over the weekend, and she said, look, last year the Japanese knotweed was this big and now it's like,
Yeah.
from here to Main Street. So
What is the plan that they showed you in regards to getting rid of the stormwater?
Well, I think it's the catchment basins, and it's that whole length of Main Street, I think.
Trying to catch the drainage that's coming down.
Where's the water gonna go instead of the lake?
So I think it would basically, similar to what they did with Floral Way, they would create like kind of bioretention areas that would filter.
Filter it a little bit.
Yes.
Filter, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess and there's also connections on some of the side streets that join up to that main sewer line.
Yeah.
So that big
Yeah.
stormwater rebuilding project is a kind of a main line with a couple of
And
offshoots.
plus you just have all the water running down those side streets too. I mean, just
Right.
even where
Just
everything
down.
sloped. Sorry, we went on another tangent.
No, it's all good discussion. So I think that was really helpful. I think I'll type this up and kind of have it. I think there is lots of overlap in sort of, people's ideas. I think there's a lot of conversations to be had, Steve. When you and I create kind of agendas, we'll think about some of these because I think some of them are updates from folks or us following up with folks. And if anyone has, requests, let us know. Like I said, I think, the search is going to take up a lot of our time, but we always I think to have a lot of your reportees come and update us, I think will be helpful too, now that the budget season's kind of done, of how they've been spending money or a timeline, just to hear from them. I think, I feel like we had this discussion 6 years ago, and I'm just gonna say it out loud. I think if we could have Tom Mullins and maybe Victor look at some sticks about the property, that would be great if there are other towns that have done sticks, because the carrot has I like that phrasing, Stacy. It's been a long time. I'm truly disappointed we're getting to another parade and nothing has been done. And I hadn't done the math, John, about the 15 years. I feel like it's been longer than that.
No, they bought it
So-
in 2011, I believe.
I think basically it may have, I think Melise goes back like 18 years. But the basically, in fact, they ran Melise out of town because they didn't want to maintain the building for the basic. But the fact that they were going to make an income of it greater than what they could take as a tax write-off, so.
So I don't know if there's something, Victor or Tom or other towns, if you can talk to your other TAs and mayors, if there's something, and maybe update us first on this demolition.
Yeah.
Meeting and what the timeline of that
I
would
mean, the
be.
quickest thing in all of this, they actually build what they've said they're going to.
Right,
build.
they do have approval to build something that is, it's okay.
Julianne did tell me that Stoneham has a consultant working on this to figure out some kind of vacant property tax incentive, something. And she also said they did it in Malden, but it was through the Board of Health, like the fire chief would go in every day and say, here's another daily fine, here's another daily fine. So that's not great, but it's been done. It wouldn't be like we're the first people to ever think about this.
And then I think if we get maybe for a future meeting, if we get a list of kind of properties, we can talk more about Butler
Town properties.
town properties, yeah. And heard, it sounds like there's not agreement, which is great, but I think it's a conversation that we should probably have every couple of years about what to do with that property. If folks haven't had a chance to tour Butler, Steve, maybe make that an option for folks to show them up there as you've done in the past. You'll put some stuff in or Sherry will put some stuff in the folder so people have access to the same sort of information.
You can do like a 1 year, like things that we could possibly get done in this next year, and then our long-term, our vision board, so to speak.
Yeah,
A
so
white whale list.
last time we tied it into our vision, we have a vision 2030 that we worked really hard on a couple of years ago. 2019? Did we do that 2019?
It was during the pandemic. It was
Yeah.
2020 was when we finished it.
2020. So, a lot of these issues, they're not new issues, right? And we do bits and pieces for a lot of them. And so we will, kind of make long-term, short-term, and, go from there. A lot of these are long terms, but I think it's good just to have the conversation. And so, we don't always need to vote on stuff. I think sometimes just having a conversation about, I like the idea about ADU since we passed that about, do we do an info session for folks in town that are interested? I don't think it's going to be a ton of people who can afford to do it, but I do think it's a good opportunity to educate folks if they want to consider it, or who did they go to, or what the regulations actually say.
I just say on the short-term, long-term thing, I think for some of these, the end result may be long-term, but I think what we've all expressed are things where there are probably steps that we can and should take this year. So I'll use the herd school as an example. Like, clearly we've got a lot of different opinions there. I think it's something that we should spend some time on talking about the different options, though. Like, I think that is an achievable goal this year. Do we get to consensus this year? Probably not, based on the discussion that we've had, but it is a really important strategic question that I think we should be asking. Some of these other things, again, ADUs, do we come up with like the be all and end all set of regulations this year? Maybe not, but this is a new thing that we should be thinking of strategically. So I think even though some of the goals that we've laid out, lake cleanup, have obviously longer time horizons than the next 11 months, I still think there are like tangible steps that we should try to hold ourselves accountable for taking in the next year.
And can I ask a question too? So how to ensure that things don't get lost in the natural cycles of people coming in and out. Like I didn't know or forgot that there was money, that the Vets Field parking lot was, I guess, on a list to be developed. Or what reminds me is like when we were at town meeting and it came to light that there had been 2 studies done by DPW for that gas farm. Right? In like, what did Joe say, 2019 or 27, like a while ago, that was like, oh, huh, like it did, like, how do, and it makes sense to me that, people come in, people go out, things get lost, like how to ensure that there's a punch list or a master calendar or,
Yeah,
this
so I
kind of-
think
this
part
kind
of that
thing.
is the transition.
The transition
I
memo,
think it's
okay,
all in Steve's
okay.
head.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to.
I've forgotten about those studies myself.
I think we need a.
Somebody at town meeting stood up and started talking about them and you could see on people's faces, they were like, oh, yeah, I
So-
forgot about those too, yeah.
I think when we talk about transition, it really is Steve, as much as he can and actually putting your direct reportees of like DPW and Bill and Aaron and, uh, um, what Anthony's working on, like the licensing that we talked about yesterday, kind of what projects do they have on their dashboard and what's the project timelines? And I know, hopefully they're all doing that as their yearly reviews. We don't see people's yearly reviews, but I think this is like, we need some sort of document so those don't get lost in the transition. So yeah, it's all in Steve's head.
And could I also add to that? I think one of the reasons why I was frustrated the fact that we didn't do this last year is that we need to hold ourselves accountable too, meaning that whatever comes out of this discussion, like I think the document should be publicly available on the website. And I know, when you were chair and when I was chair, like we actually took that and tried to like build those into agendas over the course of the year so that, if there's something that, one of us said was important to us to talk about, like that we had a place, we had some protected space in a meeting to do that. And I think that's kind of on us as a council to make sure that happens as well. So that we don't lose at least the institutional memory of the things we've talked about today.
Yeah.
I just wanna add like the notion of like having things that are like, we often don't. And by the way, this is going back to FinCom days as well, in terms of follow-up. So like, you know what, we had like knockdown dragouts over MBTA communities. I don't know, has anybody done anything on it? Has any permits been pulled? Has anything changed on Albion Street, on any of have any of those things been done? And I don't know the answer, and you spouting it off the top here.
No, I can tell
I
you
know.
that the first developer is coming in this week to talk about a property on North Ave, the MBTA, but it's already built, so it's not a huge thing.
Yeah, but it's all.
But you're right, that's the one.
Like, you think about the things that we haven't followed up on. Like, you know what? I drive my kids to the high school every day. I drive by AK Motors. I know we set a certain number of cars. I'm guessing he's hit the over on that number of cars that he's allowed to have on his lot there. And you just, the things that we chime in, and by the way, these are like, the petty little things that get missed, and then we miss big things as well, like the parking lot on the.
When they knocked down the Montrose School, big thing with me and my neighbors was the oak trees, gorgeous oak trees, beautiful. And we asked they work around the oak trees. So the statement was that they gotta keep certain percentage amount of the trees. Well, they cut down all the oaks, they kept all the junk trees around the edge.
On the perimeter.
And then there was no control over it. And getting to what you brought up, the fact that when our last town planner left, we dropped the ball in the fact that we didn't file with the state and we're paying the price for it now. So when people leave, we got to make sure there's a transition plan for every employee. The fact that they're working on something, how do we make sure that whatever there's continuity between one staff member to the next staff member to the replacement. Now, Steve's not going anywhere, so we're pretty happy that he's going to be around
We are not.
But you don't know.
we're not
You don't know where I'm going.
reaching out to Steve. That is, yeah, no, I mean, that's
Didn't go anywhere either. He still lived in Wakefield. I think the point that you made is a good point, which is that is a classic example of, for whatever reason, there wasn't an effective transition at that point, and there was a very life
I've
consequence.
seen it all the way through my career in my business,
Yeah.
in the sense that, when you buy a 15-year lifespan of 15-year bus, they'll send you up monthly or quarterly, they'll send you up updates on the equipment, what have you, okay? Well, that person retires, someone gets that bill, they throw it in the wastebasket and nobody's tracking it. And so those kinds of things happen in other industries. And hopefully we can come up with a plan, maybe based on how we handle Steve, that in each position we lose. When you lose a police chief, you're losing continuity. When you lose a fire chief, basically it's carrying on that business that they just do normally.
Can I throw one other thing there too? I mean, one of my big things that I've talked about for years is a performance review process. And in Steve's last contract, we kind of built that. I mean, he's the one employee that we have to do that. But I think that's another reason why that process becomes important, because you have that documentation and you can go back and say, not only here's what the priorities were, but here's what we actually did. And it's part of that record that we're able to keep to make sure that there's continuity when you have a transition.
I'd like to bring one last issue and, make it short, okay? Keeping the meetings short is important because people won't watch them. They won't.
There's lots of.
I mean, if they're
reasons
long-
to make sure.
And maybe when we have our seventh member on, bring up the issue, which I think is important, public participation. Because I think that's dangerous. And I think that it's affected how the town's being run. And that's my perspective. I'm just bringing it up for possible, if you're interested, and we can talk about it later, is the fact that there are a few people who take advantage of that. And then we also, our committees that we appoint, there's been some assassinations. They've attacked them. You witnessed it, right, Jonathan? So I think that public participation in regards to a given issue is one thing. We're bringing up an issue that affects the neighborhood. That's fine. But to allow people just to enter every conversation and have their opinion without running for office, offer their opinion on everything that's going on in town, I think is wrong. And I think it affects the people and how they look at us. I think it affects how government's being operated. I think we're the ones that went out, we got elected, okay? They don't want us, they can get rid of us, okay? But to have people come in and use the system that way, I think it's wrong. And something for you to think about.
One thing I learned when I took my open meeting training last week was you need to have a public meeting, and even if somebody on the body needs to attend by Zoom, you give them a Zoom link, but we don't have to record and we don't have to open it Zoom to the world. If people want to come, they can come sit at the table, even if you have a member of the body who's Zooming in. That was an eye opener for me. And I think during COVID, everybody got used to just making it completely wide open virtual.
And
So we may want to think about reining that back a little bit.
you know how many emails I got? I don't get it. This individual doesn't email me. She probably listened to it tonight anymore. I don't hear from her at all. But okay, how many emails? Look at the such and such a meeting at 9:40. Okay, so I'm interested. I look at such and such a meeting at 9:40 p.m. Well, you really can't do that because you're not looking at the context of what was being said and what the discussion was. But it's being used against not only us. I don't care about that part, but it's being used by members of our committees that we appoint to do a job in the town. I think that's wrong. So something to think about. But
So I want to be mindful of time and get us out of here before 8. So I'm gonna try to, I'm gonna type these up, kind of do short term and maybe steps. I'll figure out some way, and then I'll share it at our next meeting and we can work. So we'll have something to work on it I think John or Doug said, we'll have a new member joining us next month, and I want them to weigh in also, so they'll have something to look at. And then, you know, we can do this in a regular meeting of hearing about their priorities as well. John, that was something too that I wanted to talk about at today. So, you know, just to have some, and we didn't do this last year, but just to have some ground rules. And I'm not saying this as anyone in this room is a problem, but I think, you know, to be mindful, to be respectful, always, and treat each other like we need to be collegial. We have a lot to do. We have important stuff to do, right? We're all volunteers here. I'm hoping when we get our new town administrator, something to look about is all of our committees. We have such great volunteers, and some of the volunteers are the amount of work and effort that they do, and the amount of harassment they get is uncalled for. And so I know Steve blocks a lot of the punches for us, but I think that is something that we need to continue to work on. So, but I hear you. And I think we model what we want other boards and councils to do in town. So we're going to really try on that, but yeah.
Can I add one little tidbit? Actually, two tidbits. One of the things I heard when I was campaigning was one very vocal gentleman. He's like, I have no idea what the hell goes on up there at town hall. What do those people talk about? And I heard a flavor of that, you know, from some other people when I was going door to door. So I think maybe like, as we're talking about this priority list and a way of holding us accountable to what our priorities are, is maybe we consider some type of public facing prioritization list to say, here's who's working on what. And this is what the town council has viewed for their priorities, just so we make that public. And so it'll hopefully lead to maybe some more positive public participation. Because I told people, like, when this guy was, you know, kind of grousing at me, I said, well, you know, the great thing is those meetings are open. You can just go down to town hall anytime you want, sit in a chair and listen to everything that's going on. And, you know, you won't be able to ask questions, but you'll be able to listen. So that's my one tidbit. The other one is just thinking about the discussion about the lake. It seems like we'd like to get an updated, what do you call it, watershed management plan, a WMP. And I think that's something that, like, the state DEP has a definition of. And that it would encompass everything. It would be the infrastructure improvements that would need to improve water quality, would be best practices for how to prevent, you know, hardscape runoff into the lake. So that might be a long-term town priority to have a really thorough watershed management plan.
Is that something like funding wise? How does that work? Is that strictly DEP, or like what does that generate? How does that get generated?
You know, I'd have to do some
Curious.
research on it, but
I'm not familiar with it at all, so that's why I ask.
well, like one of the things I was thinking of while you were talking about the lake is MWRA has hired companies. I don't know if you go over walk the reservoir up here on the Stone and Melrose line, but they've got a actual ecological restoration company, like they actually line the entire lake shore with black plastic to kill the Phragmites and the Japanese knotweed. And that's like one management technique that's part of a broader watershed management plan.
So why don't I added it to the list. I'll add it there. And I think it's something that we have to have more conversations with about. And also on Thursday, I think Friends of the Lake is, you know, we do everything in partnership with them as much as we can. So we can talk to them, because I'm sure they have ideas about this stuff as well. So I think I'll add it to the list, and we will continue talking about it.
Hey, are the fishing line tubes up? Do we know?
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't-
Okay.
I think so, yeah. I saw them this weekend.
I do think,
We're under town.
I do, Doug, I hear you though. I do think that we sometimes take votes and then we don't hear the aftermath. And so I think as much as we can share those things, I think that's like really important. So I appreciate you asking and Stacy saying that.
I bring up one very quick thing. I think that this next fiscal year, and a couple brought it up, is going to be a tougher financial year than we've experienced, I think, since 2008, 2009, 2010. And I think we have to look on both sides of the aisle here. It's not gonna be, I don't think it's gonna be as draconian as some make out. I do think that we are not gonna get the state aid that I think we should get, because I think it's being put in other places. But I do think we have to look at, and we've talked about this, about looking at all of our fees. Because some of them haven't been changed in the building department probably for 10 years. I do think we have to look at something that I brought up many years ago, that a lot of our neighbors have, which is trash fee. I think that it could raise $2.5 million a year, pretty modest per household, me included, because as the council knows, we're often getting petitioned by people that want to have their trash picked up that do not right now, because they're in condos. One was tabled at, I think, 11:59. Thank you, Jonathan, for tabling that. That's still on the table, and those people came back, and I said, well, it's on the table, we'll see.
Like our town council meetings to stick to one calendar.
One calendar day, yeah. And I think that in combination, we've really added, and I'm very thrilled and proud, to a lot of our services that we provide, and the citizens deserve. I think that if we hold budget increases next year to around 3%, 3.5%, maybe the schools get 4%, maybe.
Yeah, you've already given that away.
No, our contracts are 2.5%.
Are they?
But all right, then you have a layoff in there too. I get it. I get it. I get it. You can.
What you're saying though, Steve, is,
We gotta squeeze both ends.
giving the instructions to the departments to
Yeah.
say, like your target is, I don't know, 2, 3, 3.5, whatever it is, but at the department level, Joe Conway, come to town council with a number that sticks within that 3.
Our target is,
Figure out how to get
our
there.
target is every year contractual and 0, but we have to bring it down probably a little bit. But I think we have to look at the other end too. You have to look at the income end too. I think we're gonna have to look at health insurance. Luckily, the state does seem to have funded the GIC. It was 240 million in the hole, but they did fund that in a supplemental, so that's good. But I think we have to look at all of that. And I think if we do that and we really are careful in the next year or so and set those things up, I think that sets us up for the next decade, as long as there isn't something crazy that happens. Because let's face it, we're not, the state and federal government is not coming to help us out as much as I'd like. That's it. Keep that in your mind.
Did you have anything else? I'm sorry, we didn't.
No. I really think it's a finance year next year.
Okay.
But all those are excellent priorities.
Do you still have the fee stuff that we had worked on like pre-pandemic?
I'm sure I do.
It probably makes sense to bring
Yeah.
it back at some point.
And Steve, as we start I
It
know,
started earlier. FinCom's gonna start earlier.
so I
Budget.
think that's helpful that we started earlier. And also I'd love to hear from Victor, because as these new properties go up, there is more money coming in, and I don't know what that number looks like.
I think I show that every year, the new growth number.
Yeah,
And that is baked into our
projection.
forecast.
Yeah, okay. So, because I do think once the head of the lake, that's 400 units, right? So that's a lot of property tax there. That's new.
We've taken that into account.
Okay,
But we kind of skirted around that issue today because you're replacing commercial property with residential property, and the tax rate is higher for commercial property. So it's not as much as you would hope.
Gone up though. pretty
Yes, the valuation has gone up too.
Yeah.
But, $1.4 million in new growth. We need another 1 million on top.
so yes, we will talk a lot about finance and all these other priorities.
Should we consider zero-based budgeting?
Well, I think that zero-based budgeting is very hard when you have contracts. So,
But from the standpoint of, I realize that to keep people within that 2.5% realm, to say, you gotta present, I look at that, I don't look at that as a negative thing. I look at that as you gotta keep on justifying what you're doing.
I think I look at that within sections of the budget. You can't do that with each individual department. You have a department of 3, you know,
Agree.
but you look at the entire mix in town hall, yes.
But I think you get to. So one of the concerns I always have with zero-based budgeting is it is like a massive amount of work for the departments, right? Because you're basically asking everyone to start from scratch and kind of
Right.
build up from the services. It is just administratively difficult. I think you can get to the same result if you set an expense target that is where you
Yep.
need it to be. So again, like the example would be if we say, I don't mean to keep using DPW as an example, but I will.
They're a good one to use.
You know, but if you say your target is 2, okay, well, current staff gets us to 4 because of the salary increase. So somehow Joe has to figure out within, you know, the expanse of his multi-million-dollar budget, where do you find another 2%?
Right.
And it does force, I think that does force the department heads to think creatively about where can they find those dollars in the least impactful way from a services perspective. So I think it achieves the same aim, but it does so in a way that's just administratively a lot less challenging. Sorry.
That's okay. No, good conversations.
You were gonna end the meeting. and
I was, seven.
My fault.
Wait, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you, Sherry.
Have a great night.
Just gonna clean up after